Welcome back to another episode. I'm so glad you're here. And today I want you to think about when it was the last time you promised yourself that you would do something differently. Maybe it was the way you respond to a certain kind of client. Maybe it was the price that you will hold. Maybe it was the boundary that you will enforce. Or maybe it was the morning that you will start writing instead of scrolling. Maybe it was a conversation you will finally have. The honest one, the one that you have been rehearsing for months in your head without ever letting it leave your mouth. You meant it. And I know you did. The intention was genuine, the clarity was real. You can feel the future version of yourself nodding in agreement. This is the right move. This is the next step. This is what the woman that I am becoming will do. And then the moment came, the exact situation you had been preparing for. The client who pushed the boundary, the opportunity to price of your value, the morning alarm, and the phone within reach. The conversation that it was right there waiting for you to be had. And you did the whole thing. Not because you forgot, not because you did not care, but because something older, deeper, and faster than your conscious intention moved through you before your conscious intention could get into variance. Something automatic, something rehearsed, something that has been running for so long that it doesn't need a permission anymore. That is a pattern. And if you are honest, genuinely, specifically honest, you can probably name 3 or 4 patterns that you have been running your business in your life for years. The same conflict in different relationships, the same financial ceiling in different business models, the same retreat from visibility in different platforms, the same overcommitment in different packaging. You have been addressing them, you have worked on them, you have named them in a journal entries, in coaching calls, in late night conversations with the one person who knows how hard are you trying, and still they return. Today is about why, not the surface why, the real why. The one that it lives underneath all the strategies, in all the good intentions, in all the sincere promises that you have made to yourself in the quiet hours when the pattern is the most visible and most painful. Because the pattern is not the problem, the pattern is the output. And until you understand the input, the specific, traceable, deeply personal architecture that it is generating the output, you will keep addressing the pattern and wonder why it keeps outlasting every solution that you apply. This is the reset. This is the truth. And I need to start here because it's the single most important refrain in the entire conversation. And almost every approach to personal change gets it wrong. The pattern is not the problem. The overcommitment is not the problem. The people pleasing is not the problem. The undercharging is not the problem. The procrastination is not the problem. The avoidance is not the problem. The shrinking is not the problem. These are symptoms, outputs, the visible behavior, the expression of something that lives underneath the surface. Something that the symptom is designed to manage, resolve, or protect against. And when you treat the symptom as the problem, when you address the overcommitment by building better boundaries, address the undercharging by studying pricing psychology, address the procrastination by implementing time blocking, you are working at the wrong layer of the architecture. Not because those tools are bad, they're useful. They produce temporary relief. They can make the symptom more manageable for a season, but they don't touch the surface. And the source, untouched, continues to produce the symptom. Eventually, the boundary gets eroded. The pricing reverts. The time block gets overridden by urgency because the system underneath, the conscious patterns that generates the behavior in the first place, was never addressed. The pattern is not the problem. The pattern is the solution. A solution to a problem that you have not yet identified. This is the refrain that it changes everything. Every pattern you are running, including the ones you hate, including the ones that they're costing you money and time and peace, exists because at some point in your development, it solved something. It addressed a need. It protected you from a threat that it was real at the time. A threat to your belonging, your safety, your worth, your place in the system you depend upon survival. The overcommitment solved the problem of not feeling enough. The people pleasing solved the problem of disapproval. The undercharging solved the problem of the client saying no. The shrinking solved the problem of being too much, too visible, too powerful, too threatened to the equilibrium of the relationships around you. The patterns were intelligent adaptations. They work. And the part of you that is still running them, the part that is faster than your conscious intention, that acts before you can think. That produces the old behavior in the new situation with a consistency that it feels like betrayal. That part is not sabotaging you, it is protecting you. It is running an old program that it was designed for an old threat, and it has not received the update that it says that threat is no longer present. You are safe now. You can try something different. The pattern interrupt. Does not happen through force. It happens through understanding what the pattern was built to protect, and then through the specific body level process of providing that protection in a new way, allowing the old program to release. Drop the word pattern in the comments right now if you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you can name the specific behavior you keep promising yourself that you will change and it keep not changing. Not because you're weak, but because something deeper is running the show. I read every comment and I want to know what is true for you. So where do the patterns come from? Not the behavior roots, the actual sources. Because the same behavior can have different roots in different women. And the healing depends on which root is producing the pattern in you. 5 sources, and I'm going to name them with specific details. Because vague understanding produces vague healing. Precise understanding produces precise healing. Source number 1, the unprocessed experience. The first and the most common root. The pattern is running because something happened to you that it was never fully processed, not intellectually, emotionally, somatically, at the level of the nervous system where experiences are actually encoded and stored. A rejection that it was absorbed but never felt completely. A betrayal that it was managed rather than grief. A period of scarcity that it shaped your relationship to money without ever being consciously examined. A moment of public shame that taught your body that visibility is dangerous. And that lesson was stored. Not as a memory that you can recall and reassess, but a felt sense that activates automatically whenever visibility becomes available to you again. The unprocessed experience lives in the body is an incomplete stress cycle. The nervous system at the time of the original event mobilized for fight or flight or freeze. The energy of that mobilization was never fully discharged. The threat was never fully resolved. And so the nervous system remains in some small but persistent way is still responding to the original event is still happening, or it can happen again at any moment. Nervous system patterns are not cognitive. You cannot think your way out of that response that it was encoded below the level of thought. The healing requires returning to the original experience, not to relieve it, but to complete what it was incomplete, to allow the body to do what it could not do at the time, to feel the feeling fully, to discharge the mobilized energy, to register the threat as past rather than present, to update the prediction model that it was been running on the outdated data ever since. This is the source that produces the patterns that feel the most irrational. The ones where you can see clearly that the current situation does not warrant the intensity of your response, where the logic does not add up, where you know you are overreacting and cannot seem to stop. That gap between the stimulus and your response, that gap is the distance between the present moment and the unprocessed experience. There's coloring it. Source number two, the inherited pattern. The second source is the one that most women never think to examine because it does not originate on your own experience. It originates in the experience of the people who came before you. The relationship with money that your mother carried, the relationship with power that your grandmother absorbed, the silence around emotion that your family system enforced across generations, the specific ways the women in your lineage survive, the strategies they develop, the parts of themselves that they suppress, the accommodations that they made to stay safe in systems that they were not designed for their flourishing. These are breaking generational cycles. Or more precisely, these are the cycles that you are being asked to break because you did not invent your pattern with money out of nothing. You inherited a framework, a set of implicit rules about what money is, what it costs, who deserves it, and what happens to the women who have it. They was built across generations of women navigating their own survival in their own particular context. And those contexts are not your context, but the framework is still running in you, encoded not through direct experience, but through the emotional atmosphere of the family system that you were raised in, through the model behavior of the adults around you, through the things that they were said, and more powerfully, the things that they were not said. The silence they communicated that it was too dangerous to speak out loud. The inherited pattern is often one that it feels most like just who I am because it has been running since before you had language to name it. It was in the water you drank before you knew it was there. The healing of an inherited pattern requires a specific kind of awareness, the willingness to look at your own behavior and ask, not just why am I doing this, but whose pattern is this? Who told me this? Where did this come from before it came to me? And then the even more specific and sometimes painful willingness to recognize that the woman who passed it to you was also carrying it, not originated on her. That pattern is older than any single person in your lineage. And that you are the woman who gets to be the one who finally sets it down. It finally puts it away. Source number three, the identity structure. The third source is the one we touched on the last episode. But I want to go deeper here because the identity dimension of repeating patterns is more specific than I had room to address before. A pattern persists when the pattern has become part of the identity, not just a behavior that the identity produces, but a feature of the identity itself, a way that the self understands and describes itself. The woman who says, I have always been someone who gives too much, is not just describing the pattern, she's constructing an identity. And identities, once constructed, resist change with veracity, that it makes willpower look like a gentle suggestion. Because changing a behavior that is part of your identity is not just a practical shift, it is an existential one. It requires becoming someone you do not yet recognize. And the nervous system, which prefers the known to the good every time, will pull back towards the familiar self, even when the familiar self is suffering, because at least the suffering is known. At least the suffering belongs to someone she recognized. Emotional patterns that they were embedded in the identity are the hardest to shift, not because they are more deeply rooted in trauma, but because they are more deeply woven into the self concept. The woman who has built her sense of herself around being the one who holds it all together, the one who never asks for help, the one who absorbs everyone else's pain, releasing that pattern means releasing an identity. And the question that it leaves underneath the resistance is always some version of, if I'm not this, who am I? The answer is, you are someone who chose a different way. But getting to that answer, generally in the body, at the level where the old identity actually releases, requires the willingness to pass through the territory of not knowing who you are. The minimum space between the old self and the new one. In many women turn back at the threshold, not because they are weak, because the threshold is disorienting. It is supposed to be. It is the space where identity is not fixed yet. And that is terrifying to a nervous system that it has built its entire safety model on the stability of fixed self. Inner child healing is often the most effective path into the source because the identity structure was formed in childhood. And the moments where the young self making decisions about who to be in order to survive and belong, revisiting those moments, not to relieve the pain, but to witness the decision, to see the young self choosing the identity out of necessity, and to offer that young self the permission to choose differently now that the necessity has changed. Is the beginning of the release. Source number 4, nervous system set point. The fourth source is the most biological and the one that it produces the patterns that feel the most involuntarily. The ones where you genuinely cannot seem to choose differently, where the body acts before the mind can intervene, where the pattern runs rather than you running it. Every nervous system has a set point, a homeostatic baseline, a familiar range of activation that it considers normal. This set point is established through repetition. The states you inhabit most consistently becomes the states that the system optimized for. And the system will actively resist moving outside what is familiar, even when the range is painful, because the stability to the nervous system is more important than comfort. The woman who has lived in chronic low grade anxiety for years has a nervous system that it has been calibrated around anxiety, is the baseline. Offer that system genuine rest, genuine safety, genuine stillness, and it will resist it. Not because rest is dangerous, because rest is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar to a system calibrated for threat is dangerous. This is the source of the pattern where you finally get to the thing that you have been working towards, the revenue goal, the client load, the schedule that it actually has a margin, and you immediately create a crisis. Not because you don't want peace, because the peace is outside the set point. The nervous system does not recognize it as safe, and so it generates a problem, a self sabotage pattern that it looks like failure of discipline. But it's actually a homeostatic correction, the system pulling itself back to the range it knows how to survive in. The reset for this source is gradual. It is the slow, consistent daily practice of spending slightly more time in the new state and slightly less time in the old one, in allowing the nervous system to acclimate, not dramatically, not through a single breakthrough experience that is supposed to rewire everything, through the patient, repeated accumulation of evidence that the new state, the peace, the stillness, the financial stability, the schedule with margin is survivable. That you can be in this new place and still be okay. The set point shift, but it shifts slowly. And the woman who respects the pace of her own nervous system rather than trying to force it through dramatic interventions is the woman who actually reaches the new baseline and stay there. Source number 5, the unconscious loyalty. The fifth source is the most hidden and most powerful, and it's the one that once seen produces the most dramatic and immediate shift. The pattern persists because some part of you is loyal to it. Not because it serves you, not because it's protecting you, not because you need it anymore, but because some part of you believes that releasing the pattern you will mean betraying someone or something you love. The money pattern you inherited from your mother, where releasing it, it feels like leaving her behind in the scarcity that you are now climbing out. The voice pattern your grandmother could never have, where speaking fully and freely feels like enjoying something that she was never allowed. The survival pattern your family shared, where moving beyond survival into genuine thriving feels like abandoning the people who taught you how to survive. Subconscious patterns of loyalty are not logical. They do not respond to rational arguments about how your success honors your family rather than betraying them. They live in the body, in the emotional bond between a woman and the people who shape her. People who may have been deeply flawed and deeply loved, people whose limitations became the ceiling that you are hitting now. People whose unspoken rule was we survive together. And to leave the survival pattern is to leave us. This is the source that produces the most guilt. The pattern that it costs you the most. The financial ceiling, the visibility wall, the authority you cannot quite inhabit is the one that you feel the most conflicted about releasing. Because releasing it, it does not just mean changing a behavior. It means breaking an unconscious contract. A contract that you did not sign consciously. A contract that it was offered to you by a child's understanding of love, loyalty, and belonging. A contract that says, I will not outgrow you. I will not become something you cannot recognize. I will stay in the pattern that we share because the pattern is the bond. The healing of this source requires something that it is in its own way the most sacred word in this entire conversation. It requires the willingness to see the loyalty, honor it for what it is love, not weakness, and then make the conscious adult, clear eyed choice that the child cannot make. The choice to love the people who shape you without being controlled by their limitations, to honor their survival by moving beyond that, to break the cycle not as an act of rejection, but as an act of continuation. Because the deepest way to honor a woman who survived a scarcity is to build the abundance that she cannot reach. And the deepest way to honor a woman who was silent is to speak with the full voice that she was never given. That is not betrayal. That is the fulfillment of everything she was surviving for. So go to therealnextlevel.com and apply if the fifth source is the one that it hit the hardest. If you felt the guilt before I even finish it describing it, that is specific, heavy, complicated guilt that rises up every time you get close to outgrowing the pattern. That is loyalty. And it is the most important thing that we can work on together. Apply. Tell me what is the pattern. Tell me who you think you will be betraying by releasing it. I read every application and I will hold exactly what you bring. Now, the architecture, not a list of tips, a precise sequential process for actually interrupting the pattern at its roots. 3 movements in order, because the order is what makes it work. Movement number 1. See the pattern before it runs the first movement. It's the most deceptively simple and the most practically transformative. And it is the one that the patterns are most invested in preventing because the pattern survives by running below the threshold of awareness. It moves faster than your intention. By the time you realize what happened, the pattern has already executed. The practice slow the gap between the trigger and the response by even 1 second, not by eliminating the pattern that is not available in the moment of activation, by noticing the moment of activation itself, the specific somatic signal that it tells you that the pattern is about to run, the tightness in your chest before the yes that you meant to say no, the collapse in the belly before the price you did not meant to offer, the heat before the email that you did not meant to send. The body always signals before the pattern executes. Always the signal may be fast as a fraction of a second, but it is there. In learning to notice that signal, not to stop it, just notice it, creates the beginning of the gap. And the gap is where the choice lives. This is the pattern interrupt. And it is the most literal, practical form, not dramatic, cinematic breakthrough. 1 second of awareness between the trigger and the old response. 1 second where instead of the pattern running you automatically, you see it running. And in that seeing, something that it was completely unconscious becomes slightly conscious. And it's slightly conscious is enough to begin the change. Practice this daily, not in the high stakes moments. Start in the low stakes. The conversation where you habitually over explain, the task where you habitually avoid, the small boundary you habitually let it slide. Notice the signal. Name it silently. Pattern. One word, 1 second. And then decide. Not from the old automatic response, but from the 1 second gap that now exists between the trigger and the action. Movement number 2. Ask what is the pattern protecting. The second movement is the diagnostic, the specific question that it takes you from the symptom to the source. When the pattern activates, when you have the 1 second of awareness, use it to ask, what is this protecting? Not, why am I doing this again? That question produces self-judgment, which it activates the same system that it produces the pattern. The question that it produces understanding is, what is this protecting me from feeling? Because the pattern is a defense, and it is defending against an emotional experience that the system has learned to treat as dangerous. The overcommitment is defending against the feeling of not being enough. The shrinking is defending against the feeling of being too much. The undercharging is defending against the feeling of rejection. The avoidance is defending against the feeling of confrontation. The self-awareness journey is in the most practical form the progressive discovery of what each pattern is protecting you from feeling. Because once you know what the feeling is, the specific, nameable, traceable emotional experience that the pattern was built to prevent, you can address the feeling directly rather than managing the pattern endlessly. And here's the thing about the feeling, it is almost always less devastating than the pattern has trained you to believe. The pattern, like an overprotected guardian, has been preventing you from experiencing something that it was genuinely treating at the time that it was installed, but that it has not been updated to reflect your current capacity. You can handle the feeling now, that feeling that you cannot handle then. The pattern is running in an old data. In the update, the nervous system patterns recalibration happens through the specific, deliberated, supported experience of feeling that the thing the pattern was protecting you from and discovering that you survived it. Movement number 3. Choose the new response while the old one is still uncomfortable. The third movement is where the actual rewiring happens. It requires the specific kind of courage that is not dramatic. The quiet, daily, uncelebrated courage of choosing the new way before it feels natural. The old pattern is comfortable in the way that the familiar things are comfortable, even when they hurt. The new response is uncomfortable in the way the unfamiliar things are uncomfortable, even when they are better. In the nervous system, given the choice between the familiar pain and the unfamiliar better, will reliably choose the familiar pain until you consciously override that choice enough times that the unfamiliar becomes familiar. This is not about willpower. Willpower is a depletable resource, and the patterns that you are up against it have been running that for years. They have deeper reserves than your willpower. This is about a strategic, deliberated accumulation of new experience. Each instance of choosing the new response while the old one is still pulling is a vote for the new identity, and the nervous system is counting. The holding of the price when the old pattern says to discount. The saying of the no when the old pattern says accommodate. The publishing of the content when the old pattern says check it one more time. The having of the conversation when the old pattern says to wait for a better moment. Each of this is not just a behavioral choice, it is a recalibration event, a moment where the nervous system is being shown the new way did not produce the catastrophe that the old pattern predicted. We survived it, we're still here. The danger was a memory, not a present reality. Habit loop psychology tells us That the habit loop cue routine reward is broken not by eliminating the cue, by replacing the routine while preserving a genuine reward. The old routine provides a reward. The avoidance, the dangerous feeling, the new routine must provide a different reward. The experience of surviving the feeling, the discovery that the feeling was survivable, the gradual accumulation, body level trust that the new way is actually safe than the old avoidance. You do not need to be fearless. You need to be willing to feel the fear and choose the new response anyways. And then notice that the fear was wrong about what would have happened. That is the update. That is the reset. That is the thing that it actually genuinely changes the pattern. Subscribe right now if you are not already in this community, because the conversation about how to actually, not theoretically, not aspirationally, but actually change the patterns that are running your business and your life is the conversation that lives here. Every week, subscribe and stay. Let me show you what she looks like, the woman on the other side of this work, not as an aspiration, as a map. It's the version of you that the three movements produce when they're practiced consistently enough to produce a genuine recalibration. She still feels the pull to the old patterns. The old grooves are deep and the nervous system does not erase them. It builds new pathways that they become stronger than the old ones. But the pull is not what it was. The gravity is weaker. And she has built the specific practice capacity to notice the pull, name it for what it is, and make a different choice. Not through so much effort, but through the quiet authority of a woman who has cast enough votes for the new way that the new way now is her default. She prices her work without the silent negotiation that it used to happen between the number that she wrote and the number she published. She holds boundaries without 3 hours of anxiety that it used to follow every note. She creates content without trying to be perfect, like that used to consume her energy. Then now she's creating because that's who she is. She has the conversation that she used to rehearse and postpone, not because she has become someone who enjoys confrontations, but because she has become someone who chooses honesty over the old pattern of managing other people's comfort at the expense of her own comfort. She breaks the cycle, specifically, precisely, one pattern at a time. And then the absence of the old patterns creates space, not just a scheduled space, but internal space. The background energy was being spent on maintaining the old architecture. The vigilance, the accommodation, the edging, the over explaining. Now she's free. And she directs that energy into the building, into the depth, into the specific aligned subconscious patterns that no longer run her because she has seen them, understood what they were protecting her from. And she provided the safety that they were waiting for before releasing the grip. Her business reflects the internal shift, not immediately. The external always lags the internal, but consistently within a season, the clients change. Not their demographics, but their readiness. The women who find her are women who are ready for the depth that she now has the capacity to offer because she's no longer spending a third of her energy managing her own patterns in the coaching relationships. The pricing holds, the boundaries hold, the content lands with the weight that the pattern driven version of her could not access because the pattern driven version was always to some degree performing rather than being, and the difference between performance and presence is felt by everyone in the room, even when they cannot name it. She's not perfect. She's not done. New patterns emerge at new levels. The ceiling you break through becomes the floor of the next room. In every new level of authority, invisibility activates new material to work with. But she has something now that the women who are still repeating did not have. She has the process. She knows how to see the pattern, ask what is protecting, and choose the new response. While the old one is still uncomfortable. And because she has the process, she's not afraid of the next pattern when it shows up. She knows it's not a relapse, it is the next excavation site, and she knows how to dig. Before I let you go today, I want to say something directly. The pattern you keep repeating is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that you are not committed enough, or disciplined enough, or spiritual enough, or far enough along in your healing to be building what you're building. The pattern is an artifact, a traceable, understandable, specific artifact from a specific chapter of your story. And it's still running because the chapter it belongs, it was never properly closed. The experience was never fully processed. The grief was never fully felt. The loyalty was never consciously examined. The identity was never given permission to evolve. The nervous system was never adequately showing that the threat has passed. None of this is your fault, and all of it is available to be changed, not through more force, not through better strategies, or through 100 versions of the promise that you have already made to yourself 100 times, through the truth, the specific, precise, and native truth about where the pattern comes from, what is protecting you from, and what would you have to be willing to feel in order to let it go. That truth is the reset. And it is available to you the moment you're willing to look at it. 3 things before you go. If today's episode names something that you have been living without language, if one of the 5 sources or the 3 movements or the picture of the woman who stopped repeating gave you something real, like this video right now, one thought, because it's a woman in your community who is about to make the same promise that she has already made to herself 100 times. And your one tap is how she finds the real conversation instead. Leave a comment with the words, I release the old pattern. Because the declaration, the specific spoken witness declaration, is one of the votes. It is a vote cast in public before the new way is comfortable. That it says, I am choosing the direction that I'm going to, not the pattern. I am leaving. I will see your declaration. This community is real. And if you are ready to stop managing the pattern and start healing the source, and if you know which of the 5 roots is producing the behavior that is costing you the most, and you are ready to do the specific guided one-on-one work that it actually changes everything, go to therealnextlevel.com and apply. Tell me the pattern. Tell me what you think is protecting. Tell me what your business and your life looks like on the other side. I read every application, and the woman who is ready will not be turned away. Subscribe if you are not already here. The excavation continues every week, and the woman you are becoming needs a community that sees her. I will see you on the next episode. Until then, have an amazing day. Yellow diamonds in the